In this Luminar AI photo editing tutorial, come along with me while I take this photograph and transform it into this. As I build up this photo edit and work through the tools, I'll be discussing what I'm using, why I like using it, and how you can use it to improve your photos as well. There seems to be quite a lot of confusion around how Luminar AI treats your photo. Is it changing the original photo? Is it just a set of instructions that talks to the photo? Do I need to save it? Why do I need to export it? That's something I'm going to look at the end of the video as well. So if that's something you've wondered about yourself, stick around till the end because I'll just go over that as well during the export process. I'll also take a quick look at the improvements to the Sky AI tool as well. So enough jibber jabber, let's get into the edit. So I'm pretty excited, guys, because we're currently using Luminar AI version 3, and with every new release there are improvements, there are bug fixes, all of that sort of good stuff. So if you come to the Luminar AI menu and you go to the help section, you can just check that you are using the latest version with the check for updates. And as you can see, we are at version 1.3, the newest version. So one of the things I noticed straight away was that Luminar AI opens much quicker than it did previously. So that's a really good thing. What I have here on screen is a shot that I took on my way back from an architectural photography shoot. And while my architectural photography pays the bills, I really love taking landscape photos. So this shot here where these ducks were just swimming away, the sun was setting through these trees here, I really love this, but I really feel as if this photo could be something more. But here's the thing, I don't quite know what I'm after from it. And that is one of the reasons that I really love Luminar AI as a creative tool, because sometimes if I'm working in Photoshop or Lightroom, I'll just end up staring at a photo and not really know the direction I want to take it and just end up closing it down frustrated. But with Luminar AI, with things like the templates that you have access to here, it's so much quicker just to make really quick creative changes and actually see what you like and what you don't like. So if I jump into easy landscapes, for example, I might just click on a couple of these and see what I like. And as well as helping you decide what you do like, it's also quite good at showing you what you don't like. So for me, a black and white conversion of this photo is just not an option. I really love that we've got a really nice complementary color palette with the orange and yellow complementing with the blue. So black and white, nah, that's just not right for this one. This forest stream, on the other hand, if we look at our before and our after, I'm really liking the look of this. This is helping to saturate the image and it's giving it a nice rich depth to it as well. So here's our before, here's our after. So personally, I'm not a big fan of applying the templates as my finished look. I just feel like I'm cheating a little bit. But what I do like is just giving you that idea of where you've come from and where you can get to. And at least it can give me a creative nudge in the right direction. So just looking at this before and after, I know that I certainly want to saturate my image slightly and give it this nice sense of richness that this particular template is giving it. If you're familiar with Luminar AI, you'll know that you're not just limited to using a template or not. What you can actually do is just use it as a launching pad for your creative endeavors. So if you come to the edit section, once you've applied a template, all of the tools that have the little dot next to them just indicate that the template you have applied has utilized that tool to some extent. So for example, we have structure applied with an amount of 10. Within the light section, that template added some smart contrast. So if you're new to photo editing, I think it's actually a really good way to backward engineer a look. So if you find something that you particularly like in the template section, you can apply it, then jump into the edit section, and then you can just analyze what is actually being applied to make the photo look that particular way. And for any tool, you can just toggle it off and toggle it on, and there you can see that the Enhance AI, which is one of my favorite tools to apply, you can see that that is actually making quite a marked improvement in this template. If I were just to apply a template and say done, that's not really going to help us and teach us much in this video. So I'm going to reset this and start from the ground up. So the very first tool I will go to, and I'll normally do this every single edit, is just jump to the Enhance AI tool, grab the Accent AI slider, and just have a little look what that's doing for me. And this is one of Luminar's most powerful AI tools, so it's really, really useful. The Sky Enhancer will certainly enrich that blue, but I'm just going to leave that for now, and I may even consider doing a sky swap on this. I've heard a lot of positive things about Luminar's Sky AI improvements in version 1.3, so I think it'd be a good opportunity to test that out in this photo. I'm happy with the composition. I don't feel as if there's anything I particularly need to erase in this photo, so I'm just going to jump into the light section. If I grab the temperature slider, I might just want to warm this photo up slightly. As you can see, as I push this to the right, we get much more of a warm evening kind of feel. But the further I take it, we start to lose the rich blueness. So I'm not going to take that too far. Around that 21 mark is good. And then I'm going to balance it so it's not just pushing towards yellow, but more of an orange. I'm just going to add a little bit of magenta in as well. The exposure is pretty good, but as with anything inside Luminar, just grab the slider and have a little play around and just see whether you like it one way or another. I'm going to leave that where it is. Do we want to add some smart contrast or take any away? Yeah, let's put a little bit of that in. We can increase the brightness of our highlights, or alternatively, just bring them down a little bit just to protect that brightness over there in the background of the sky. We already have detail in our shadows in the trees over here, so I don't really need to push this up, but maybe a little bit will just help. Bringing the black point down and boosting the whites up just ever so slightly is just, again, going to increase that contrast a little bit more. I'm pretty happy with those changes, so let's have a quick look at our before and our after. I really love that ability to toggle the before and after. And in doing so, I kind of feel like we may have just warmed this image up a little bit too much. So I'm just going to ease these sliders off just a little bit so we're getting that hint of warmth, but not as extreme as I applied it initially. Okay, let's have a look at Structure AI. And where I feel this will be particularly beneficial is in all this lovely detail of the bark of this tree on the left-hand side. So let's see, let's crank this slider up. And absolutely, that is bringing in a whole load of structure through there. Currently, that's far too much at 92, but we can certainly see what it's doing. As I toggle this off and back on, off and on, I'm trying to analyze the overall picture and just get a sense of how much of this effect do I want to apply. And this is one of those instances where I feel like I don't want to uniformly apply a certain amount over the whole picture. I want to change the amount that I'm putting on. So I want more of this effect over the trees on this left-hand side and less on the right-hand side. So I'm going to actually use the add mask feature, and I'm just going to paint the effect in, and I'm going to bring my opacity down to about 20%, and I'm going to use my bracket key, my right bracket key, just to increase the size of that. And I'm going to click and just start painting. And by applying it with a 20% opacity, that enables me just to start layering this effect. So if I toggle this off and back on, you can see that the only place we're really affecting now is just this branch here. Come back to my masking and again, make my brush nice and big. And now I'm going to start painting that effect at 20% over more of the picture. So now I'm getting 20% of the effect over here where I've painted, and I don't know, we're probably up around that sort of 60-70% mark over here now as we're layering that effect. Let's toggle this effect off and toggle it on. I'm also going to just paint in a little bit just over the mountains in the background and the bridge as well. It's pretty subtle over most of the image, but we are applying a lot more of it over the tree here. And I really like the texture in that tree, so I'm happy with that and I'm ready to move on. I'm going to open the color section, and one thing I want to do is actually create more of a uniform color palette. We've definitely got those complementary colors going on with the yellow orange complementing against the blue of the sky and the water, but there are a couple of things that I'm just finding a little distracting, and that is the addition of a red boat right here and also the green of the grass in this bottom left hand corner, and also along the fringe of the riverbank as well. So I'm going to drop down the HSL section here, and with the hue itself I'm just going to come straight into the greens and bring that towards the left. And you can see as soon as I've done that, I've taken away a lot of that green cast that we had here and pushed that more into the same color palette of that yellow of the rest of the grass. If I toggle it off and on, you'll actually see that effect. It's subtle, but I like it. I like to simplify my color palette where I can. We've got the orangey red boat here, so if I just have a little play around with that, yeah, you can see that we can either push that red hue towards more of a magenta, which certainly brings your eye to the boat, or what we can do is reduce some of the redness and take that towards orange as well. And I just feel that that simplified color palette is a little easier on the eye. So let's look at our before and our after. Before, after, like I say, really subtle, but I do like that. Now let's have a look at our details and see whether we need to sharpen this up. So I've zoomed into the grasses here, and I'm just going to jump into the sharpen section and crank that up to 50%. Let's look at our before and our after. That's doing a pretty good job. Before and after. Now the exact amount that you sharpen your photos really depends on your final output. I'm thinking that this particular photo is a good candidate for my landscape photography site where I actually sell prints. So I'm thinking that a nice amount of sharpening that's going to help this look great as a canvas print is a good option. So I'm going to leave that around 50% and move on. I don't think anything in the landscape section is particularly going to help me, but I'm just going to have a little play around and see. So the golden hour is certainly enhancing those yellows, so maybe we do want to introduce just a little bit of that. The foliage enhancer is going to push more of those green tones back in, so I don't really want to be doing that. And the dehaze slider, that's not really doing too much for me either. One thing I may want to do though, you can see on the horizon line here that it's actually creating more of a yellow hue right above the mountains here. So if I toggle that off and I toggle it on, I can actually utilize that effect by getting my mask and just painting that in just along that horizon line there. So again, I'll do that with 20% just so I can start to build it up slightly. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush and go for another pass. And now if I toggle that off and toggle it back on, it's quite subtle, but I feel like that's just enhancing that sunset kind of vibe, just having that nice yellowy hue just sat above the mountains. Let's see if we can't improve things by putting a vignette on it. So as you would have seen in some of my other videos, if I'm working with a vignette, I don't like to do it really subtly and then make changes to the shape because you can't really see what's going on. So I work heavy-handed, I push it all the way to -100, and then I can actually see exactly what these changes are doing. I always like to push my feather quite high, and that's just going to help with the transition between those dark edges and the actual brighter part of the frame. Conversely, if you were to get rid of the feather altogether, you get a very hard transition. So rather than just being at that midway point, I think, no, let's utilize that and just soften this off so it's nice and believable. Unlike vignette tools in other photo editors, this actually has a brighten the center option, and that's really nice. So what I might actually do is just bring a little bit of inner light into that central area. And now I know exactly what my vignette looks like. Here's our before, here's our after. I'm now free just to ease the overall amount to a place where I'm happy with it. Guys, if you don't have this photo editor yet and you think it looks like it'd be a good fit for you and your photo editing, I've got a link below and a discount code which is @Sky10, and you're welcome to use that to save yourself a bit of money at the checkout as well. And that does help me out as well because I just get a very small commission, and it just helps me to keep creating these free videos for you guys. And if you are enjoying this video, do me a favor, leave me a thumbs up, that'd be much appreciated. So those changes have all been done with what Luminar AI calls its essential tools. Now it's fun time. Now we get to dive into the creative section. Personally, I'm very happy with a flat, cloudless sky. Because we've got so much busyness in the rest of the photo, there's a lot of detail in the grass, the texture in the tree trunks, the ripples in the water. I actually like the balance of having a completely smooth sky. But as I said earlier, this is version 1.3. The Sky AI has just had an update, so I'm going to have a play around. So let's jump into the sky selection. If working with sky swaps is something that you do on a regular basis, if you do a lot of landscape photography, or if like me you do a lot of architecture and real estate photography, having a big sky library is really important. Yes, Luminar does ship with its own skies already, but it doesn't take long before you've exhausted those options. And anyone else who's got Luminar AI is going to recognize those skies, and therefore there's a very good chance that your work is going to look very generic and similar to anyone else who's got Luminar AI. So what I would recommend doing is actually getting yourself your own sky library. If you're lucky enough to live by the coast where you can get some good shots of the sky without any foreground elements breaking the skyline, fantastic. But if you're like me, you need to find a sky library, and I'll put a link to the one that I've got below because it's got over 3 300 different skies, and they're all fantastic. High resolution skies, really usable, well worth getting, link below. So let's try a sky anyway. Let's just drop something in. I think we need to go for something that does have that evening vibe. So let's try something like this. The artificial intelligence inside of Luminar AI is certainly going to have its work cut out, creating a believable and accurate mask around all of these leaves. But in terms of believability, the onus is not only on Luminar AI to create the mask, but also on you as the photographer or compositor to actually pick a believable sky. If you choose a sky which has completely different lighting conditions to the one that you're working with, such as I did here, it's just not going to look good. But while I drop in another one which also does not look believable, let's see what we can do with the settings inside of the Sky AI tool just to help massage that sky more believably into the scene. One of the really good additions to this new version is we have control over the horizontal position of the sky. Woohoo! So Luminar AI thinks that our horizon line actually is where these mountains are here. So we need to kind of override that and actually shift this sky down slightly. Let's see if we can't refine the mask slightly just to improve the masking. By pushing the global amount up, that's helped fill in some of those gaps around the leaves. We can also increase the close gap slider as well. Now, if you're not familiar with scenery lighting, this is a really powerful option. Basically, it takes the color palette that exists in the sky and remaps those colors into your pre-existing scene. So if I crank that all the way to 100, you'll see what I mean. We should start to see some of these pinky magenta tones start to appear more in our foreground. You've got the option to increase the saturation of that relighting mode. If you've got a human in the scene, you can also use that on them. And we've also now got options to control the reflection. So we can blur the amount of the reflection in the water, which is really cool. You can decide how powerfully you want the sky to actually reflect in the water. So as I push that to 100, we start to see more of these tones that exist up in the upper part of the sky reflecting here. But one of the most useful adjustments is still inside this sky adjustments drop down here. You can blur your sky slightly with the defocus slider. And one thing I like to do is actually introduce a little bit of atmospheric haze, because normally I'll find that will give a little bit more of a believable look to the sky. You see there, it's just pushed back that saturation of the sky a little bit. We can also brighten the sky up too. And we've got the option to cool off or warm up the sky. So because we had a few kind of bluey magenta tones in the sky that I didn't really feel matched the rest of the scene, I'm just going to warm that up. So although I don't think I'm going to do a sky replacement in this particular photo, if I were, we've got a lot of control now, a lot more than we used to have. And the fact that we've also got an option to control the reflections is a really big improvement. But having had just a little play around with that, I'm now just going to turn that all off and go right back to how we were before, and I actually prefer this. I don't normally add anything with the augmented sky, but let's suppose you wanted to add some birds into the shot. You do have the option to do that, but that's not really something I'm into, so I'll just take that away. But something I would like to try is just adding some atmosphere AI. I'm going to go with some layered fog, bring the depth all the way forward, and let's have a little play around with this, see what effect we've got. Now I'm going to bring the lightness down. And let's toggle this off and on just to see what effect it's doing. We'll bring the amount back down a little bit. But I do want some of this fog sitting here, and there's a reason for that. I want to introduce some sun rays coming through here, but without any cloud, any atmosphere, fog, haze, there's nothing for the light rays to actually show up in. So if you have a beautifully clear and pristine landscape, and then you try and incorporate some visible sun rays, it's just not going to look very believable. So that's why I've introduced some layered fog here, just so that we've got some atmosphere for the sun rays to show up in. So let's put our sun rays in. First of all, crank the amount up. And now let's place our sun center in exactly the position where our sun is, which is over here. Now this is one of the tools I think often benefits from applying a mask afterwards, so I can actually paint this effect in just where I want it. But first things first, let's tweak the settings just to get it the way we want it to look. So we can darken everything off, giving it that richer look, or we can make those sun rays bleed through even more. We can control how far we want the sun ray length to go. And the slider underneath controls how much penetration we want. Surely we want a lot of penetration. Let's crank that up. Well, contrary to what you may think, maybe you don't want as much penetration. So let's just ease that off. In all seriousness, that slider just controls whether or not the rays of light will penetrate, i.e. go through an obstacle or not. So you can have a little play around with that and just find that sweet spot where you like it. I'm being heavy-handed with my settings at the moment because, as I mentioned before, I'm going to mask this back in and I can just build up that masking effect. So I want a strong effect underneath that I'm then able just to bring back in more subtly. Let's jump to our sun settings. And let's see whether a nice bit of glow around the sun is what we want. I don't think the radius we want too far. Let's play with the ray settings. We can either have a lot more sun rays or bring that all the way down. And sometimes I find having a much lower number there gives a more believable look. We can crank the sun ray warmth up as well, so that might harmonize better with those yellows that we've already got in the scene. And so when you've got the overall look how you want it, what you can do is just grab this randomize slider and have a play around with that. And the chances are you're going to find a setting that you prefer. But I'd recommend doing this at the end once you've actually set up the look of your sun rays, because then you're better able to determine what you actually like. So let's say I like elements of this, but not all of it. So what I'm going to do is just come back and paint this in only where I want it. Again, we've got an opacity of 20, so we can build this effect up slowly. I'm going to paint across the mountains in the background because what I want it to look like is as if the sun rays are coming through from the back behind this tree here and just grazing over this background here. And now you can just start to see them come back in. And now I'll just paint some in the foreground here. And if you do paint the effect too much, you've always got the option to use the erase feature as well. So I can come to my erase and just get rid of some of that. I think that was just a little bit too strong in the foreground here. And maybe also this beam coming down here might just be a little bit too bright. Let's toggle this off and back on again, just so we can see what we've done. And it's looking pretty good. I just want to remove a little bit more from the foreground, so I might just crank the opacity up just so I can do this a little bit quicker. There we go. Here's our before, and here's our after. Let's see whether the dramatic tool adds anything to this. Yeah, I quite like that. So a few of the tools like the Accent AI tool, the structure tool, and also the sharpening have introduced quite a bit of crunchiness to this. Even the dramatic tool before, we've added quite a bit of localized contrast. So if we look at our before, things are much flatter. There's not as much dynamic contrast in the local areas of the photo. So if I toggle our before and our after, you can see we've got a lot more detail. So one thing I like to do is actually kind of balance that out with the mystical filter. As you'll see, as I crank this amount up, what it normally does is just soften things off slightly. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. It's a look that I can't really fully describe in words, but if I turn it off and I turn it on, or sorry, the mystical filter, turn that off and I turn it on again, you'll see that it just softens things up in a way that I really like. It may not be your cup of tea, but I quite like it, particularly for landscapes. Now, while I really like the color tonality of our blue, yellow, what I'm going to do is just jump into the mood section. As I alluded to earlier on, Luminar AI is such a good tool for just playing around with things. So I'm going to go through some of these cinematic toning looks and just see if there's something that I prefer. I really love being able to go through these creative LUTs and just give your photo a different, distinctive look just by selecting one of these. There's a reason that the movie industry has been using LUTs to color grade films for years. It's just a really powerful way to give a feeling to your photography. So if I wanted to go for a softer, more muted look, this 1960 vibe might be great. Alternatively, if I wanted to enhance the colours a little more and push that saturation, Long Beach might be the way to go. On this occasion, I think I'm going to go for Bakersfield. So for this particular edit, I'm going to call that done. Let's have a look at our before and our after. And as always, as you know, if you feel like you've gone a little bit too far with your edit, you can come down to the bottom right hand corner here and you can just ease off the overall amount of your effect that you've created. So this is none, this is 100%. And while you might be happy with what you've done, you may just feel like it's a little bit too strong, and you can come to somewhere around that 60 mark, 70 mark. It's entirely up to you. So now we've got a much more subtle version of what we just created. So here's our before, here's our after. I'm really happy with that. So now it's time to export my finished photo. A lot of you have asked me about how Luminar AI is affecting your actual physical file on your computer. So I'm just going to go over that really quickly. Basically, all of these changes that we made through Luminar AI to the Accent AI, that is not doing anything to your original photo. All that's happened is you've created a set of instructions that Luminar AI is applying via a database to your photo. So in front of us, we're seeing a representation of the changes that we've made down here, but the actual original photo, this one, is currently unchanged. So if we want to actually have a usable version of this photo, that is when we need to come to export and actually send this photo out of Luminar AI and save it to our computer. So we'll come over to save photo to disk. Now I won't go over all the settings here, but basically if you stick to JPEG that is in a sRGB color space without resizing the photo, you're just going to stick to your actual size and you export this with a quality of around 80, you're going to be in a pretty good place. So I'm just going to call this my Luminar edit and click export. And now Luminar is creating a version of this photo with those changes baked into it, and that's going to be a JPEG that I can use for sending to my printer, uploading online, basically whatever I want, but my original photo remains unchanged and is still available to me on my computer. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really enjoyed working on that edit for you. Hopefully you guys like the finished outcome. Do me a favor, let me know what you thought of the photo in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video and found it useful, do me a favor, leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you don't own Luminar AI yet and you want to get yourself a copy, I've got that discount code which is @Sky10 and a link below, and you're more than welcome to use that, and that also helps me out with my channel as well. Thank you again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next video.